The flowers had been my best work. I know that sounds like vanity, but it wasn't. It was just fact. The way it's a fact that Tuesday is colder than Monday, or that my left hand is steadier than my right. I'd been arranging florals for 6 years, and the centerpieces I'd built for the Vitelli wedding were the first time I'd looked at something I made and felt the specific, quiet satisfaction of a thing being exactly right. White freesia, pale eucalyptus, a handful of ranunculus the color of old ivory. The kind of arrangement that didn't shout at you. It just held still and waited for you to notice it. I tucked a stem of freesia behind my left ear without thinking about it. I always did that with the leftover blooms. Something to do with my hands after a job was finished. The reception hall was filling up around me, silk and candlelight, and the particular hum of a room full of people performing their best version of themselves. And I was threading my way toward the service exit when the champagne went sideways. Not my champagne. A passing waiter's tray clipped by someone's elbow and a full glass tipping directly onto the shoulder of the man standing at my left. I turned. He was tall, dark suit. Not the rented kind, the kind that had been built around a specific body and knew it. Dark hair silvering at the temples. A face that had been handsome once and was now something more. The kind of face that had survived things and kept the evidence quietly. He was looking down at his jacket with an expression that was perfectly, completely still. That stillness was the first thing I noticed. Not anger, not irritation, just stillness. The way a very deep body of water looks still, and you only understand the current when you are already inside it. Every person within 10 feet of him had gone rigid. I didn't understand that yet. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning," I said. The stillness transferred from his jacket to me. His eyes, dark, unhurried, came up and found mine. I held them. Not because I was brave. I held them because I genuinely did not know there was a reason not to. A muscle moved in his jaw. One. Then stopped. "You arranged the flowers," he said. Not a question. "Yes, for the Vitelli wedding. Yes, I'm contracted with, I know." He looked away from me then, toward the room, something moving in his expression so quickly that I couldn't name it before it was gone. 2 men nearby shifted their weight simultaneously like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. "Stay near me for the rest of the evening." I blinked. "Excuse me. Not a request." He said it without looking back at me. "There is a man in this room who will use you if you wander. You are not equipped for that. Stay within 3 feet. Don't speak unless I address you." I opened my mouth. He finally looked at me again. "The offer includes compensation." I'm just the florist. I know what you are." Something passed across his face again, there and gone, like a reflection in moving water. "That's why. I should have left. The service exit was 12 meters away. I had my bag. I had my van keys. I had a life entirely outside of this room that did not involve standing next to a man in a ruined Brioni jacket while the people around him radiated the specific tension of loaded things. I didn't leave. I stayed. Not because he told me to. I told myself that later and mostly believed it. I stayed because something in the way he'd said "I know what you are" didn't sound like dismissal. It sounded like the opposite. Like he had looked at me and seen something specific and I was unforgivably, inexplicably curious what it was. So I stood next to him. I didn't speak. Not because he told me not to, but because I'd run out of words. He was 3 feet away, and the room moved around him differently than it moved around other people. It made space, unconsciously, the way water makes space for a stone dropped into it. I watched it happen. I watched a man in a cream suit across the room catch sight of Lorenzo, I did not know his name yet, and go very deliberately still before choosing a different direction to walk. The freesia behind my ear was beginning to wilt in the warmth of the room. I could smell it, delicate, almost sweet, with that particular edge of green that meant it was a few hours from the end of its life. Later, I would learn that the man in the cream suit was Fabrizio Esposito, that he had come to the wedding to make a point, that the point involved leverage, and that leverage had a shape, and the shape was whoever could be seen standing closest to Lorenzo Vitelli when the night ended. Later, I would understand why Lorenzo had kept me at his side. That night, I just stood there and thought about my flowers, and watched a man I didn't know be still in the center of a room that was quietly, invisibly, terrified of him. He didn't look at me again until the end of the night. When he did, it was brief. A glance down at the white freesia behind my ear, barely a second, and I would have called it nothing. I didn't know then that he was filing it somewhere he would not be able to lose it. "You can go," he said. I went. I don't know why I looked back. He was already looking away. I had left 6 vases. This is the thing about floristry that no one outside the industry understands. You do not just send flowers and walk away. The rental inventory comes back, the specialty vessels, the mercury glass, the hand-blown Murano cylinders I'd sourced specifically for the Vitelli centerpieces. Those came back with me, or came back in pieces, and 6 years of building a small business had made me deeply, specifically protective of my inventory. So I went back the next morning. The Vitelli estate was 40 minutes north of the city, a place where the road narrowed and the cypresses lined up like sentinels, and the gates were wrought iron with the kind of weight that suggested the people behind them had strong opinions about who moved through them. I had come through the service entrance the day before with my van and my assistant, Petra, who had taken one look at the security detail and spent the entire setup humming nervously to herself. Petra was not with me this time. A man met me at the gate, not in uniform, but with the particular posture of someone who wore authority like a second skin. Late 40s, broad across the shoulders, with a face that had once been conventionally handsome and was now comfortably lived in. He was holding a small protein bar and looking at it with an expression of deep, personal betrayal. "Third one today," he said, not to me. Then he looked up. "You're the florist. I came for my vases." "We know." He tucked the protein bar into his jacket pocket with the resignation of a man returning a weapon to its holster. "Marco Ferrante. I manage the household." He said manage the way someone says a word they don't entirely believe in. He said you'd come. I processed that. He said, "Follow me." The interior of the Vitelli estate was the kind of place that made you aware of your own breathing. Marble floors, high ceilings with plasterwork so ornate it seemed excessive, until you were inside it, and then it seemed simply true. This was how rooms in this world looked, and the world outside was the one that had been simplified. My 6 centerpieces still stood on the tables of the reception hall, which had not yet been cleared, the flowers now past their peak but still holding their shape. Freesia, gone slightly soft at the edges, the ranunculus lowering their heads with a kind of exhausted dignity. I found my vases behind the service bar, wrapped carefully in linen that was not mine. Someone had done that. I didn't know who. "You wrap these yourself?" I asked Marco. The Don asked that the arrangements be respected. Marco said it matter-of-factly, picking up one of the cylinders to hand to me. "He noticed your work." I didn't know what to do with that. I was packing the 3rd vase when a door I hadn't noticed opened, and Lorenzo Vitelli walked into the room. He was dressed differently than the night before. Charcoal trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves turned back to the forearms. He looked like a man in his own house, which sounds obvious and wasn't. He looked like the house fit around him rather than the other way around. He stopped when he saw me, but it wasn't surprise. It was something else, something I couldn't name. Like a small thing confirmed. "You came back," he said, "for my vases." "Yes." He moved to the windows, tall ones, looking out over the grounds, where 2 men were walking the perimeter with that particular kind of careful casualness that is not casual at all. "Did anyone escort you from the main road?" "The gate let me through." "I know. I mean," he paused, "someone should have met you at the road. I'm just picking up my vases. In my house." He said it simply, not possessively, more like pointing out a fact of physics. Gravity works in a certain direction. You are in my house. These things are true. You'll have an escort from now on when you come here. I looked up from the packing. Why would I come here again? He looked at me directly. That same quality from last night, unhurried, exact, missing nothing. "Because I'm commissioning you for the month. Standing arrangements for the main rooms. Delivery and replacement twice weekly. I have other clients. I'm aware. The rate I'm offering will accommodate the schedule conflict." He named a number that was unreasonable. Not extravagant in a flashy way, the way people offer obscene money when they want you to feel bought. It was precise. It accounted for exactly my time and the overhead it would cost me. He had done math that was specific to my business, which meant he had learned things about my business, and that should have alarmed me more than it did. Why? I said. He seemed to consider the question. Because the flowers were excellent, and because I owe you something for last night. You don't owe me anything. I know I don't. He turned back to the window. I'm choosing to, regardless. Marco appeared in the doorway then, holding the protein bar again, with renewed suspicion. The 11 o'clock is here. He looked at the protein bar. Do you know how many almonds are in this? 14. 14 almonds, and they call it a meal replacement. My nonna would. Marco. Going. He disappeared. I heard him in the corridor. 14 almonds. 14. I looked at Lorenzo. Is he always? Yes. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The architecture of one, every day for 12 years. I finished packing my vases. He stayed at the window, and I was aware of him, the way you're aware of a fireplace in a room, not looking at it directly, but knowing exactly where the heat was. At the door I stopped. I don't know why. I'll need to do a site visit, I said. For the standing arrangements, I'll need to see the rooms. He didn't turn from the window. Wednesday, I repeated. I drove home thinking about the number he'd offered. About Marco and his 14 almonds. About the way Lorenzo Vitelli stood at a window like a man deciding whether to let himself be seen. About the fact that I had agreed to come back. I hadn't meant to agree. I wasn't sure when exactly I had. Wednesday arrived with rain. I came through the gates at 9 in the morning with my notebook and my measuring tape and the specific professional focus that had always been my best armor against rooms that tried to impress me. I had arranged flowers in embassies, in penthouses, in the private dining room of a cardinal who had very specific opinions about roses. I could assess a space without being consumed by it. The Vitelli estate tested that theory. Marco met me in the entrance hall, dry today, which seemed to represent a personal triumph, and carrying a small notebook that he consulted with great seriousness. Main salon, private dining room, his study, and the east corridor, he said, in that order. I'll walk you through. Is he here? I asked, and then immediately wished I hadn't, because I heard how it sounded. Marco looked at me with an expression of profound, gentle assessment. He's in a meeting. A pause. He said to tell you, take whatever you need. The rooms are yours. The rooms are yours. I tucked that away without examining it. The main salon had 15-foot ceilings and windows that faced east, which meant morning light that moved across the floor like it was looking for something. I noted the quality of the light, the existing furniture tones, dark walnut, deep burgundy in the upholstery, and felt the specific click of my professional mind locking into a problem it knew how to solve. White and green here. Clean lines. Something that didn't compete with the room but didn't disappear into it either. The private dining room was harder. It had a silence that felt inhabited, the kind you find in rooms that have held things. Arguments, agreements, grief. Long table, 12 chairs, a sideboard with photographs that I did not examine because they were not part of my job. I was measuring the sideboard when I heard voices from the corridor. Italian, low and quick, and then Lorenzo's voice, quieter than the others, which made it the one you tracked. I couldn't understand the words. I didn't need to. The quality of the pause that followed told me everything about who was in charge. A door opened. I kept measuring. 2 men passed the dining room entrance without looking in. A third stopped. Lorenzo. He looked at me with that unhurried exactness, saw the tape measure, saw my notebook, and came into the room without invitation or explanation. Frisia again, he said. I put my hand up to the stem behind my ear. I hadn't realized I'd done it again. Tucked a leftover piece into my hair while I was working. Old habit. Occupational hazard, I said. He said nothing. He moved to the window with that quality of his, the one that was starting to become familiar to me in the way a piece of furniture becomes familiar, until you notice its absence, and stood with his hands in his pockets. You designed the Marchetti anniversary installation, he said, at Palazzo Sforza. Last spring. I looked up from my notebook. How do you know that? It was photographed extensively. The technique was unusual. You used structural branches inside the arrangement, not just blooms. Industrial and organic at the same time. You follow floral work? He turned from the window. I noticed one installation because it was technically surprising. Then I found out who made it. He said it as simply as reporting weather. You're more skilled than the work you normally take on. I didn't know what to do with that either. He said things that should have been compliments but arrived without the equipment that made them feel like compliments. No softness in the delivery, no lean toward approval. Just assessment, like he was reading a report. I take the work I can get, I said. The bigger commissions go to studios with more staff. You work alone. Me and one part-time assistant who is terrified of your security team. The corner of his mouth again. That non-smile that was, I was beginning to understand, his version of a smile. I'll tell them to stand down on Wednesdays. I started to say something. Julia Vitelli walked in. She was 29, dark-eyed, wearing the specific ease of a woman who had grown up surrounded by authority and had decided early on not to be impressed by it. She looked at her brother, then at me, then back at her brother, with an expression that moved too fast for me to read. The florist, she said, not dismissive, curious. You're actually good. I was standing next to the arrangement at the west table the entire reception, and I kept thinking someone had done something unusual with the structure. Thank you, Julia. Lorenzo said her name, in exactly one tone, which appeared to be a sentence. She ignored him beautifully. I'm Julia, his sister, the one with manners. She extended her hand. You be coming Wednesdays? And Saturdays, for now. She nodded. Something in her expression settled, like a question had been answered without being asked. Good. She turned to Lorenzo. Fabrizio called this morning. I didn't return it. I thought you should know. The ease left her voice on the name. Just for a moment. Lorenzo's stillness went a different quality. I'll handle it. After she left, the room held that name differently. I could feel it even not knowing what it meant. Is there anything I should know? I asked. Not about Fabrizio. I meant about the house, the rooms, logistics. He looked at me. He knew what I meant. No, he said. Not yet. That yet sat in my chest like a stone. I finished my measurements. Santo, the oldest man in the household, gray-templed and quiet, who had nodded at me when I arrived and seemed to be the only person on the property who moved at a fully normal human pace, brought me coffee without being asked. It was strong and perfect. You're good at this, he said, watching me measure. At floristry? At being in a room like this and not looking frightened. He said it kindly. It's rarer than you'd think. I thanked him. I didn't tell him that I felt something I hadn't named yet. Something that was not quite fear and not quite its opposite. Outside, rain against the windows. Inside, white freesia going still in my hair. I had started learning the shape of his world, and the shape was larger than I'd thought. The third Wednesday I came. In 4 weeks, the standing arrangements had become part of the estate's rhythm. The way the morning coffee was part of it, the way Santo's slow circuit of the east grounds was part of it. I arrived. I worked. The rooms held the flowers held the rooms. I was telling myself it was purely professional. I was wrong, and I think I knew it, and I was choosing not to examine that knowledge the way you choose not to press a bruise. That morning, I was on a stepladder in the main salon, adjusting the height of an arrangement in the tall alcove near the bookshelves, when the ladder shifted. It was a small shift, an uneven floor tile I hadn't accounted for. But I was reaching with both hands, weight forward, and the shift was enough. I didn't fall. That's the factual account. Lorenzo caught me. He had come into the room silently, which I was learning was simply how he moved. Not an intention, but a quality. Like how a certain kind of cloth falls quietly. And he was close enough that when the ladder rocked, his hands were already at my waist before I had fully processed that I was going sideways. He was very still afterward. I was on the floor, both feet. His hands were still at my waist. I was aware of them in the specific, detailed way that you are aware of something you are trying very hard not to be aware of. The weight of them. The temperature. My own breath doing something irregular. "Thank you," I said to the middle distance. He stepped back. But not immediately. There was a half-second that lasted longer than it should have, and then he stepped back, and the air where his hands had been felt different from the air around it. "The tile," he said. "I should have had it replaced. I should have checked." We were talking about the tile. We were not talking about the tile. He moved to the window. His habitual position, I had decided, the window, and I climbed the ladder again, more carefully, and finished the arrangement. The freesia at the top of the cluster was perfectly placed. I tucked the leftover stem behind my ear, and then made myself not look at him to see if he noticed. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask." That night at the wedding, the man in the cream suit. What was he going to do? Lorenzo was quiet for long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. He was going to take a photograph of you, standing near me. He paused. A woman who means something to a man in my position becomes useful to his enemies. It is a simple equation. But I didn't mean anything to you. He turned from the window. That would not have mattered to him. I absorbed that. So you were protecting me. I was preventing a complication. That's not the same thing. No, he said slowly. It's not. Marco appeared in the doorway. He was holding a small bowl of steamed vegetables and regarding it with the expression of a man being slowly executed. Rosaria says these are delicious, he announced. Rosaria is lying. Rosaria has always been lying. Rosaria is an agent of my suffering. He ate a broccoli floret with profound misery. Tell me honestly, he looked at me. Does steamed broccoli ever become something you want? Or are we all just pretending? I think some people genuinely enjoy it, I said. Those people, Marco said gravely, are not to be trusted. He pointed at me with his fork. You're talented, by the way. The arrangement in the dining room, my mother used to put flowers like that, white ones. I don't know the name. He said it simply without sentimentality, and then turned and walked out before I could respond. I looked at Lorenzo. His mother died 4 years ago, Lorenzo said quietly. He doesn't talk about it. I looked at the doorway Marco had vacated. Something shifted in my chest. Marco of the vegetables and the protein bars and the deep complaints, standing in front of my flowers and thinking of his mother. He loved her, I said. Very much. I came down from the ladder. The room held us both, and the arrangement I had built, and the conversation we had been having and not having, and all the space between what was said and what was meant. His phone vibrated. He looked at it once, and the particular quality of his stillness changed, became heavier. I need to take this. I'm almost done anyway. He moved toward the door, phone to his ear, already in the other conversation. Then he stopped, turned back. Arya. My name in his mouth. He had not used it before. I had been the florist, the commission, the professional engagement. My name arriving in his voice sounded like... I couldn't find the word for it, like a key in a lock maybe. Like something had been decided without my input. The arrangement, he said. At the east window, move it 2 feet to the left. Why? Because that's where the afternoon light reaches. It'll last longer. He left. I stood in the middle of his salon, holding my measuring tape, and he had just told me. With perfect accuracy, with observation that required him to have watched both my arrangement and his light across the course of multiple afternoons, where my flowers would live longest, I moved the arrangement 2 feet to the left. I didn't examine why my hands were not completely steady when I did it. My father owed Lorenzo Vitelli 300,000 euros. I found out on a Saturday. I had known my father owed money. This was not new information. My father had owed money my entire life, the way some people have a chronic condition they manage and occasionally mismanage. Small debts, medium debts, the kind of debts that circled back around and required renegotiation. He was charming about it, my father. People lent him money because he made them feel, briefly, like the most important person in the conversation, and by the time that feeling wore off, he was already somewhere else. I had not known the scale of this particular debt. I had not known the name of the creditor. Saturday morning, I had come to deliver the week's arrangements and found Santo waiting at the gate with an expression that was careful in the specific way of someone preparing to say something that will change what comes after it. "He'd like to speak with you," Santo said. "Inside, not about the flowers." Lorenzo was in his study, a room I had only seen from the doorway, darker than the others, walls of books and one lamp, and the kind of organized surface that suggests a mind that processes by arranging things precisely. He was standing when I came in. He gestured to the chair across the desk and then, because I apparently looked like I needed the information, said, "Sit, please." I sat. He remained standing. He put a folder on the desk between us but did not open it. "Your father's name is Cesare Conti." "Yes, he approached my organization for a bridge loan 14 months ago. Commercial collateral, short repayment term. The loan was extended twice. The collateral has since dissolved." He paused. "The balance owed is 340,000 euros. The number arrived in my body before my mind processed it. Cold, first, then a specific quality of dread that I associated with my father's voice on the phone late at night, calling from numbers I didn't recognize. "He told you about me," I said. It wasn't a question. I could feel the shape of it, the shape my father made when he was running out of moves. "He offered your services as additional collateral 3 months ago," Lorenzo said. "In practical terms, what that means is that your business income was to be partially redirected until the balance reduced." I looked at the folder. "You've been collecting against my business." "No." He said it with a quiet certainty. "I declined that arrangement. Your father's debt is his, not yours." He finally sat, slowly, with the deliberate quality of a man choosing how to occupy space. "You were not told." "No." "I am telling you now because someone else will if I don't." I thought about the man in the cream suit, Fabrizio, simple equations. "How long have you known who I was?" I said. "When I came to the wedding. I did not know at the reception. I connected it afterward." He looked at me steadily. "The commission was genuine. I am not using you to collect the debt. I want that to be clear." "But my father used me to negotiate." "Yes." I sat with that. The flowers I had arranged in the hall outside this room, white and steady in their mercury glass vases. My leftover stem behind my ear, all of it suddenly carrying a different weight than it had an hour ago. "What happens to him?" I said. "That is to be determined." Lorenzo. His name in my mouth for the first time, and I felt him notice it the way I felt. Changes in air pressure, not dramatic, just real. "What happens to my father?" "He is not in immediate danger." He held my eyes. "I am not in the business of harming men for being foolish, only men who intend harm. He's my father. I know, he's an idiot and he's irresponsible and I stopped. "He's my father." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, in the lamplight, with the books behind him and the folder between us. He looked like a man carrying a weight that had been added to so gradually he had forgotten what his posture felt like without it. "I know," he said again. "That's why I'm telling you instead of him." I stood up, crossed to the window, his window, the one that looked over the east grounds, and stood with my back to him, which I needed, a moment of not being seen. My skill had built me something. 6 years of early mornings and market trips and calloused thumbs and the specific knowledge of which blooms held under which conditions. I built it carefully, alone, deliberately. My father had tried to hand it over to settle a debt I hadn't known existed. "I want to see the full amount," I said. "Aria, I have a client list. I have 3 corporate contracts coming up for renewal. If you let me manage the repayment, I can... You don't owe this." I turned around. He was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen before. The neutrality was still there, but under it something else had surfaced, something attentive and strange. "He's my father," I said. "Which means I do." He was quiet for a very long time. "We'll discuss it," he said finally. Not yes, not no. "We'll discuss it," which was, I was beginning to understand, Lorenzo Vitelli's version of I hear you and I have not decided yet, wrapped into 3 words. I should have been angrier. I was angry. I was also, underneath the anger, in the part of me I was not examining, aware that he had not used this against me, that he had told me instead of my father because he understood the difference. That awareness was a problem. That awareness had been a problem for a while now. I just hadn't admitted it yet. It happened on a Wednesday. I had been at the estate for 2 hours, east corridor arrangement finished, dining room refreshed, and I was loading the van at the service entrance when Marco came through the back door at a pace I had never seen him move before, which was approximately twice his normal speed. "Inside," he said. "Now." I looked up from my crates. His face had a different quality than usual, the good-natured complaints stripped away, something underneath them that was older and harder. "What? 2 vehicles on the South Road, not ours." He had his hand on my arm, not roughly, but very definitely. "Please." I went inside, the kitchen. Marco locked the service door. Through the window I could see the south approach. Stone wall, line of cypresses, a gap in the trees where the road curved, and 2 black vehicles moving too fast for delivery, too slow for police. Then the sound. 2 sharp, distinct, unmistakable sounds. I had never heard gunfire outside of film before. The reality of it was different. Shorter, more ordinary sounding, which was somehow worse. Marco pulled me down below the window line, one hand on my shoulder, and I was on the kitchen floor with my back against the lower cabinets and the cold of the marble through my jeans. "Stay," Marco said. He did not look at me when he said it. He was looking at the door to the main house. Then it opened. Santo came through it and looked at me, and the something in his face, relief, sharp and immediate, told me more about my situation than anything else had. "He's coming in from the north," Santo said to Marco. 2 minutes. I counted, without meaning to. At 90 seconds, Lorenzo came through the main hall door. He had been outside. I could tell by the cold that came in with him, the particular cold of outdoor dark. His collar was turned up, and he moved with a focused velocity that was completely different from his usual quality of stillness. Not frantic, the opposite. He moved like a man who had made all his decisions 3 steps ago and was now simply executing them. He came straight to me. He crouched in front of me, eye level, close, and his eyes moved over me the way you check a document for damage, quick and thorough. His hands came up and held my face for 2 seconds. Exactly 2 seconds. "Are you hurt?" "No." He exhaled, very small, very controlled. I had never seen him at the edge of his control before. He was still managing it, still the still water, still the deep current, but I could see the surface of it moving in a way it hadn't before, and looking at it directly felt like looking at something I wasn't supposed to see. "They're gone," Santo said behind him. "North exit, we have 2 on the tail." Lorenzo held my eyes for 1 more second and then stood. He turned, and he was fully controlled again, the surface smooth, the instructions coming clean and fast. Marco took them. Santo took his. Phones were out, coordinates relayed, the house reorganizing around a threat I only partly understood. I sat on the kitchen floor. Julia appeared in the doorway 6 minutes later. She saw me, came directly over, and sat on the floor beside me without asking. She was holding 2 glasses of water. She gave me one. "You're okay," she said. "Matter of fact, I know. It doesn't feel okay yet. That's different from not being okay." I drank the water. It was cold and specific and real, and I focused on it. "Who was it?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Fabrizio Esposito, the man in the cream suit." Simple equations. "He knows about me. He knows you're here. He's trying to." She stopped. "He's trying to give Lorenzo reasons to be imprecise. My brother is never imprecise unless someone he—" She stopped again. "He wanted to see if Lorenzo would move wrong." "Did he?" Julia looked toward the hall where Lorenzo had gone. "No," she said, "but he felt something. And Fabrizio saw him feel it, which is the point. I was a liability. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because his reaction to me was information in a world that turned information into weapons. Later, an hour later, the house quieter, the threat at the north boundary contained. Lorenzo found me in the east corridor. I was standing in front of my own arrangement, not really seeing it, just standing there with something to look at. He stood beside me. The freesia had started to open fully, that specific moment in the bloom's life where it was at maximum and the decline was invisible but inevitable. "I should have had you leave earlier," he said. "You didn't know." "I should have." "Lorenzo." I looked at him. He was looking at the flowers. "What is this? What am I here for?" A very long pause. "I don't know," he said. And I heard in those 3 words something that was not evasion. It was the most honest thing he had said to me. The honest admission of a man who always knew exactly what he was doing, confronting the one situation where he didn't. He looked at me then, and I did what I always did. Held his eyes, not from bravery, but because I didn't know not to. And for the first time watching him, I understood why it kept stopping him. He was not accustomed to people who looked at him like he was a person. He was accustomed to people who looked at him like he was a force, to be appeased, to be feared, to be used. My face had no performance in it. There was no calculation about how to look at him. I had no idea that this specific thing, my total lack of a strategy, was the only thing in 6 years that had made him uncertain. He reached out, slowly, and touched the freesia behind my ear, 1 finger, barely, adjusting the stem that had started to droop. "Get some rest," he said. "You'll stay in the guest wing tonight." He walked away. I stood in the corridor with my heart doing something irregular and my flowers going still around me. Florist, he'd called me that night at the wedding. Cold. Identifying. Neutral. Tonight he had said my name and touched the flower in my hair, and I was fairly certain that neither of us was going to be able to pretend this was professional anymore. 3 days after the shooting, Santo was in the hospital. He had not been hurt in the main incident. That I would have known. This was something that happened 2 days later, quietly, in the way that things happened in this world that were meant to be messages, a car, a dark street, injuries that were specific enough to be intentional. Santo, 64 years old, gray-templed, who had brought me coffee without being asked, and told me it was rare to be unafraid, was in a hospital bed with 3 broken ribs and a concussion, and a calmness about the whole thing that frightened me more than if he'd been distressed. I went to see him. Lorenzo did not tell me to go. Lorenzo did not tell me not to. I took the train, found the private facility, and Santo looked up when I came in and made an expression that was trying to be welcoming, and was mostly just tired. I put a small arrangement on his windowsill. White freesia. I'd brought it in a paper wrap. Stems in a water tube. The way you transport things properly. He looked at it for a moment. "You didn't have to come." "I know." "He'll know you did." "I know." Santo was quiet for a moment. "He's going to try to send you away." I sat down in the chair beside him. "I know that too." "He thinks distance protects people." He looked at the flowers. He lost a woman he loved 9 years ago, not to violence, to the shape of his life. She left because she said she couldn't breathe next to him. He believed her because he thought she was right. He paused. He has run this organization since he was 26. He has never let anyone close enough for it to matter since then. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to have to make a choice," Santo said simply, "and I want you to make it with the right information." I went back that evening. Lorenzo was in the main salon. He heard me come in and stood up, and his expression moved through something, relief, and something harder underneath it, before it settled back to neutral. "You went to see Santo?" "Yes." He moved toward me, slowly. "Aria." "Don't," I said. He stopped. "Don't tell me to go, not yet." I looked at him directly, the way I always did, the thing that I didn't know to stop doing and had done from the very first night. "I'm going to do it myself if I need to, but let me decide." He was very still. Not his management stillness, his real stillness, the one underneath all the management, that I had only seen 2 or 3 times. "Fabrizio will use you," he said. "As long as you are visible here, you are a tool in someone else's hand. I cannot guarantee your safety and run an operation at the same time. I understand, do you? Not a question. Do you understand what his world, what my world, looks like when the restraints come off? You have seen one afternoon of it. You have seen a fraction. I thought about the sound of gunfire, the kitchen floor, the specific quality of his face when he crouched in front of me and checked me for damage with his hands. I'm not naive, I said. You are not equipped, he said, which is different. It has nothing to do with intelligence. Then equip me. The silence was total. I could leave. The gate was accessible. My van was in the service drive. My apartment was 40 minutes south. My clients were waiting. My life was 40 minutes south and entirely separate from this house and this man and his flowers and his war. Leaving was possible. Leaving was, by any rational measure, correct. I thought about Santo's arrangement on the windowsill. About Marco eating his 14 almonds, thinking about his mother. About the freesia Lorenzo had touched in my hair that had not felt, in any way, like a professional gesture. I thought about my father's debt and how Lorenzo had not used it. I thought about the version of myself that would drive south, return to her routines, spend the next year wondering. That version was safe. That version was intact. That version had never had his hands at her waist, or seen the surface of his control move. I'll stay, I said. He looked at me for a very long time. That decision will cost you things, he said. You understand that. I'm staying anyway. Something moved through his expression. Raw. Unmanaged. There before he sealed it away. I cannot promise. I know you can't. I looked at him, the way I always looked at him, without strategy and without performance and without the appropriate amount of self-protection. Lorenzo, I'm staying. Stop trying to make me leave. His jaw, one muscle, stopped. He crossed the room and held my face in his hands, and it was nothing like the check for damage of the kitchen floor. It was deliberate, tender in a way that looked like it cost him something to perform. You are the most inconvenient person, he said quietly, I have encountered in 20 years. I know, I said. He rested his forehead against mine. One moment. Barely. Then he stepped back and the professional machine reassembled around him, and he was already moving toward the door, calling Marco's name, back in the war. But I had seen it. And I was staying. And I understood that the woman who drove south this evening and the woman who stayed were different women, and only one of them was me. I had chosen the darkness with open eyes. My eyes were fully open. The version of me that was safe and intact had driven away. I watched it go. They took me on a Thursday. Not from the estate. From the market. I had gone alone, which Lorenzo had not strictly forbidden, and I had not strictly mentioned, because the market on Thursday mornings was the most ordinary thing left in my life, and I needed ordinary things the way I needed sleep, and I had been sleeping badly, the freesia vendor. The eucalyptus bundles. The particular cold of the market hall in the early morning, stone floors and condensation on the metal stalls, and the smell of green things cut fresh, 2 men, a black car. And before I fully understood what was happening, I was in the back of it and the market was behind us, and the city was moving past the tinted windows at a speed that meant whoever was driving had done this before. I was in a room for 4 hours. It was not, I want to be precise about this, what I had imagined being held captive would be. There was no theatrical darkness. It was a room in what appeared to be a commercial building with fluorescent lights and a metal chair and a window that let in gray afternoon. It was ordinary in the worst possible way. The ordinariness was the point, I think. It said, this is not special. This happens all the time. Fabrizio Esposito came in at the second hour. He was not what I expected. He was not physically imposing. Medium height, silver hair, a suit that was well cut but not as well cut as Lorenzo's. He had a face that might have been kind once and had since been rearranged by choices into something that resembled patience, but was actually the absence of feeling anything about what he was doing. You're the florist, he said. The same words Lorenzo had used the night of the wedding, completely different weight. Yes. You're fond of the Vitelli Dawn. I said nothing. He sat down across from me, loosely, comfortably. He's going to come for you. That's the point. I want to see what he looks like when he comes. That's what this is? He was a precise man once, Fabrizio said, almost reflective. He and I came up together, you know. Same generation, same formation. He was better at it, the precision, the patience. A pause. I thought I'd spend my whole career watching him be excellent from a distance. Then 9 years ago he made a decision that cost both of us something. You don't need the details. He looked at me with no hostility. I want to see if you've done the same thing to him, made him imprecise. And if I have, then he comes in wrong. And I finish it. He stood up. No one will hurt you. You're a message, not a target. After he left, I was alone. I thought about what he'd said. I thought about Lorenzo at 26, beginning to build something. About the woman who had left because she couldn't breathe. About what it cost a precise man to become imprecise. I thought about my flowers, about the specific architecture of a good arrangement, the way you built it from the inside out. Structural stems first, the blooms last, so that what looked effortless on the outside was held up by something invisible in the middle. I thought, I am not going to fall apart in this room, not for any heroic reason, because I was the woman who had looked Lorenzo Vitelli in the eye at a wedding and said, I'll pay for the dry cleaning, and that woman did not fall apart in fluorescent-lit rooms. I pulled the freesia from my hair. I'd had it there all morning, reflex, occupational habit, and I looked at it in my hands and thought about the first night, tucking it behind my ear in a reception hall while the room moved around a man who made space out of fear. I set the stem carefully on the table. I waited. At the 4th hour, I heard the sound that the movies get wrong. They make it dramatic. In reality, a building going quiet is more frightening than it being loud, because quiet means the people who were there are no longer a factor. And the only reason for that is one other factor. Lorenzo was through the door in 14 seconds. He saw me. He stopped in the doorway. His face, I am going to be honest about this, his face did the thing it had been managing not to do for months. The management failed. For approximately 4 seconds, he was not the Don of the Vitelli family. He was a man who had been very afraid, and now was not. And those two things were both visible at the same time, and looking at it felt sacred in a way I didn't have the vocabulary for. He crossed the room. He didn't speak. He held me. Both arms, fully, my face against his shoulder. And I felt him breathing, his chest against mine, not composed, not careful, just breathing. I held on. The traitor, he said very quietly, against my hair. It was Benedetto, his logistics coordinator. 12 years, the man who had routed my Thursday market trick to Fabrizio because he had been turned 3 months ago, and none of them had seen it, because they had trusted him the way you trust infrastructure. I know, said Marco's voice from the doorway. He was holding his phone and he looked like a man who had not slept. I know about Benedetto. A pause. He looked at me. She's okay? She's okay, I said. I felt Lorenzo's arms tighten for 1 second and release. Marco exhaled. He looked at the ceiling. Thank you, he said, to no one or everyone. Then he looked at his phone. Rosaria called while we were... She wanted to know if I'm eating. I told her I'd been on a protein bar. She said that's not real food. I don't know why I find that comforting. He walked away. Lorenzo pulled back to look at me, his hands on my face, his eyes doing their thorough inventory. I found the flower, he said, his eyes dropping to the freesia stem I had left on the table. I nodded. Why did you leave it? So you'd know I was still thinking clearly, I said. Something crossed his face that I had no name for. Fabrizio is moving for the final confrontation, he said. He wants to end this in one operation. He looked at me. I am going to need you to trust me for the next 48 hours. I already trust you. He said nothing. I already trust you, I said again. I stayed, Lorenzo. I stayed. He pressed his forehead against mine. Same as before. Same gesture, the same fraction of allowance. And then he sealed himself again and stood up and turned to Marco, and the war resumed. I picked up the freesia stem from the table. Still intact, 48 hours became 60. I stayed in the East Wing while the estate became something different. Quiet in the operating way, not the peaceful way, the way a hospital is quiet, or an aircraft before descent. Men came and went through the service entrance. Marco ate nothing and looked like he was running on anger and caffeine and devotion in equal parts. Julia came to sit with me twice a day, said very little, and the fact that she kept coming told me everything I needed to know about how serious it was. On the second night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen at 2 a.m. and found the light already on. Marco was sitting at the table with a cup of tea and a piece of paper, on which he appeared to be writing a list. He looked up. He did not appear surprised to see me. "Can't sleep either," he said. "What are you writing?" "Things I want to say to Rosaria." He looked at the paper. "In case." He said it simply, without drama. He folded it once and put it in his shirt pocket. 12 years I've been watching that woman ignore me with absolute consistency. Do you know how long it takes to perfect the art of ignoring someone? He sounded almost admiring. Every day, I bring her coffee. Perfect, exactly how she takes it, I know because I paid attention. Every day she says thank you and looks straight through me. He picked up his cup. "Do you think she knows?" "I think she knows," I said. He absorbed that. "Then why?" "Some people need more time than others to let something be real." Marco looked at me with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. "Are we still talking about Rosaria?" I got up and made tea. We sat in the kitchen at 2 a.m, and Marco told me about his mother and the white flowers and the village he came from, where everyone grew jasmine in window boxes. And I told him about the first arrangement I had ever made, at 16, for my grandmother's kitchen, with supermarket carnations and a glass milk bottle. He laughed, a real laugh, surprised and warm, and said, "Carnations," with the tone of a man hearing something scandalous, and for 40 minutes, the world was just a kitchen with 2 people in it. Then his phone buzzed. He read it. He stood up. "He's coming in," he said. I heard it from the East Wing, the specific organized sound of an operation concluding, different from beginning. I went to the window and the floodlights were on the south grounds and men were moving with a purpose that was different from crisis. Resolution, not reaction. Then Lorenzo came through the estate's main door. I heard it. Then the corridor. Then the door of the East Wing opening. He had a cut above his left eyebrow. He was wearing the particular stillness of a man who had been at maximum exertion and was now at minimum. The stillness of aftermath, not composure. He stood in the doorway and we looked at each other, and neither of us said anything for what felt like a full minute. Then I went to him. I don't know who decided that. Me? The situation? Gravity. I went to him and he caught me, both arms again, the same as the room with the fluorescent lights, but different. Not relief this time. Something more permanent. Something that had made a decision. He pressed his face to my hair. He said something in Italian, quiet. I didn't understand the words. "What does that mean?" I whispered. A long pause. "I was afraid," he said, for the first time in 9 years. I held him tighter. He pulled back to look at me and I looked back the way I always had. Without strategy, without performance, and I watched what it did to him. The thing I didn't know I was doing. The thing that had been doing something to him since the first night, and that I had now had confirmed from 3 different sources who knew him, and I still didn't know how to do it differently. "You bleeding," I said. "I know. Let me, in a minute." He held my face. "Fabrizio." I looked at him. "He's finished," Lorenzo said. "It's over." "And you?" Something moved through his face. The win was real, but the cost was in his eyes. And I let myself see it, because that's what staying meant. "You saw all of it? The victory and the weight of what it took to get there. And me," he said. "I'm still here." Later in the kitchen, Marco stitched the cut above his eyebrow with a steadiness of hands that suggested this was not the first time. Marco talked the entire time about absolutely nothing. A documentary he had watched about cheese, a new protein brand he suspected was lying on the label, a problem he was having with the estate's second gate hinge. And Lorenzo sat still while being stitched and looked at me across the kitchen, and the ordinary absurdity of Marco's monologue was, somehow the most specific evidence of survival I had ever witnessed. When it was done, Marco stood back and assessed his work. "Clean," he said with satisfaction. Then he looked at me. "Rosaria makes a soup, you know, when someone's been through something. It's very good, restorative." He considered his phone. It would be a professional courtesy to inform her of our current status. He was already dialing. For the soup, purely for the soup. He walked away. From the corridor, "Rosaria, it's Marco. Yes, I know it's 3 in the morning. We've had a situation. I thought..." His voice softened to something I couldn't hear. I looked at Lorenzo. He was looking at the door Marco had gone through, and the expression on his face, the one that appeared when his management was down, was something warm and old and careful. "He's loved her for 9 years, he said. "I know." "She knows," he said. "She's been waiting for him to say it aloud." He looked at me. Some things take longer to become real. I felt the weight of that sentence in every direction it pointed. Outside, the floodlights were going down one by one. The war was over. We were still here. The final operation lasted 6 hours. I can tell this part plainly because I was not in it, not in the operative sense, and plainness is what it deserves. Lorenzo had not asked me to participate. He had not needed to ask me not to. I understood by then the difference between the world I had entered and the world I lived in, and I understood that what he needed from me was not combat capability, but the specific, undefended knowledge that something existed outside of what he was about to do. That sounds passive. It was the most active thing I had ever offered anyone. Fabrizio Esposito had made his final move the night before, a coordinated assault on 3 Vitelli holdings, designed to divide the response. It was tactically sound. It was also, Lorenzo explained to Marco and Cento and the assembled leadership in terms so precise they sounded like architecture, anticipated. "He thinks like I used to," Lorenzo said, in the briefing I stood at the edge of. Before I stopped being afraid of losing. That sentence carried something I filed away for later. They moved at 4 in the morning. I sat in the kitchen with Julia, who drank coffee and checked her phone and told me, twice, that her brother had done this before and that I should trust the pattern even when I couldn't see the outcome. The third time she started to say it, I looked at her and she stopped and said, "Right," and poured more coffee. At 7, Marco came through the kitchen door. He looked tired and whole, and he sat down heavily and put his hands flat on the table and said, "It's done." Julia closed her eyes for a half second. "Lorenzo," I said, "getting stitched. Again." Marco looked up. The other shoulder this time. He was annoyed about it. A pause. "He asked me to tell you." He stopped. He seemed to be working through something. "He asked me to tell you he'd be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 15. His left arm in a sling. Clean shirt. The cut above his eyebrow from 2 nights ago still sutured, and he had a new one on his chin that was smaller, and he looked... I want to describe this correctly. He looked like a man at the end of something he had been carrying for a very long time. Not empty, emptied. The difference matters. He came to me first, in front of Marco and Julia and Santo, who had been brought from the hospital at his request, and was sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, looking extremely annoyed about the blanket. Lorenzo came to me first. He stood in front of me and looked at me with that face that had stopped managing itself around me. "Fabrizio," he said. I waited. He asked at the end. He asked me if it was worth it, what I was protecting. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at me. I didn't answer him. Why not? Because the answer wasn't his to hear. I looked at him. He looked back, and between us was everything we had survived to get to this moment, all of it specific and real and costly, and neither of us moved or spoke, and it was the most complete conversation we had ever had. Marco broke the silence. "I called Rosaria," he announced to the room. "Last night, before the operation. I told her I'd been bringing her coffee for 9 years because she was," he cleared his throat, "because she is the most sensible and most infuriating person I have ever met, and that I would like to take her to dinner on Saturday when I am not in the middle of a tactical situation." He paused. "She said yes." Julia made a sound that was either laughing or crying, and was probably both. Santo looked at the ceiling with an expression of profound, long-suffering relief. "Only 9 years," he said dryly. "There were circumstances," Marco said. "There were not. There were. Marco." Lorenzo's voice, one tone, which was a sentence, but his mouth was doing the thing again. The architecture of a smile, the almost version that on this morning, in this kitchen, after everything, was close enough to the real thing that it counted. He looked at me. "There are things to rebuild," he said. "Agreements to renegotiate. The family requires." He paused. "It will take time. I know. And your business, I know. Your father's debt, we'll discuss it." I said his own words back to him. "We'll discuss it, Lorenzo." Something settled in his face. "Yes," he said, "we will." Julia quietly stood up and moved to the window with her coffee. Santo examined his blanket. Marco poured himself tea and looked at it with suspicious hope, as if it might turn out to be something better. It is over, I thought. Not clean, not erased, but over. The kitchen in the morning light. Full of people who had paid for this particular piece, and the freesia I had put in a cup on the windowsill 3 days ago, fully open now, at maximum, and beginning very slowly to turn. It is over. The months after were not simple. I want to say that honestly because the story deserves honesty. The world did not become safe. Lorenzo did not become a different man. There were still meetings that lasted until 3 in the morning. Still men who moved through the estate with the careful posture of loaded things. Still Julia scanning a room when she entered it out of a reflex so old she didn't notice herself doing it. What changed was the temperature. I moved into the estate in the 3rd week after the operation. Not dramatically. Not in a single announced decision, but incrementally. The way you acknowledge something that has already been true for a while. A drawer in the east wing. My equipment in the 2nd garage. A standing arrangement in his study that I changed myself, weekly. That he never commented on, but that I noticed was always placed where the light reached it best. My father's debt was renegotiated. I will not sentimentalize this. Lorenzo and I sat across a table with a lawyer and my father on a video call that my father spent being charming in a way that was embarrassing, and also exactly him, and a repayment structure was created that was equitable and that I could manage. Lorenzo removed himself from the negotiation for the final 30 minutes, which was the most concrete act of respect I had ever received. My father called afterward and said, "He's a good man, you know." "I know," I said. "Better than?" He stopped. "I'm sorry, Arya, for the debt, for not telling you." "I know," I said again. "We'll talk about it properly. Later." "Yes," he said. And he meant it, I think. He mostly meant it. Marco married Rosaria 4 months after the operation. The wedding was small. A private ceremony, the estate grounds in late afternoon, Julia in a blue dress, Santo in a suit he had clearly owned since 1994 and wore with perfect dignity. I arranged the flowers, white freesia, pale green eucalyptus, the same palette I had used for the Vitelli wedding where I had spilled champagne on a jacket that changed the entire direction of my life. Marco cried during the vows. He tried to conceal it by standing very straight and looking at a fixed point above Rosaria's head. And Rosaria, who was small and clear-eyed and had waited 9 years for this man to say what he meant, reached up and touched his face, and he abandoned the fixed point entirely and looked at her, and it was, honestly, one of the most specific pieces of love I had ever witnessed. Lorenzo stood beside me during the ceremony. His hand found mine at some point, and I couldn't tell you exactly when. It was incremental, the same way everything between us had been incremental, a fingertip, then a palm, then fully held, like a statement made one word at a time. Afterward, in the gardens, he walked me to the section where the freesia grew in the estate's borders. They'd been there for years, Santo told me once, planted by Lorenzo's mother, which Lorenzo had never mentioned. "I knew about these," I said. "I know you did. You never told me." "No." I looked at him. He was looking at the flowers with an expression that was its own history. The mother. The years. The weight of what this place had held. "Florist," he said. The nickname arrived differently now. It had been identification once, then irony. Then, somewhere in the middle chapters of everything we had survived, something intimate, his shorthand for you when you felt too exposed to say directly. Now it was warm, fully and unmistakably warm, and it carried everything we had been through inside those two syllables in a way that his name or mine did not. Yes, I said. He turned to face me. He reached into his jacket pocket and put something in my hand, and I looked down and it was a key. Old, heavy, brass, the kind that opened something that was meant to be opened by the right person and no one else. The East Wing, he said, has been yours for 4 months. I know. This is the front gate? He held my eyes. Not the service entrance. I looked at the key in my palm. Lorenzo, I am not asking you to marry into this world, he said. I am not asking you to stop being afraid of parts of it because parts of it deserve the fear. I am asking if you will live in it, with full knowledge, with open eyes. He paused, as mine. Across the garden, Marco was dancing with Rosaria to music from a small speaker that someone had placed on a stone bench, and they were dancing the way people dance who have waited 9 years and were no longer going to waste a single evening. Santo was watching them from a chair with an expression that was the closest to peaceful I had ever seen on his face. Julia was by the flowers taking a photograph of the freesia with her phone, and she looked up and saw us and looked away immediately and very specifically did not smile. Yes, I said, not a fairy tale. Yes, the yes of a woman who had sat on a kitchen floor during gunfire and stood in a fluorescent room for 4 hours and driven away from her own safety in the full knowledge that she was driving away from it. The yes of someone who had chosen. He closed my fingers around the key with his hand. Come inside, he said. We went in through the front gate. 8 months after the operation, I built an arrangement that I did not plan. This is the thing about floristry that I had not been able to explain to anyone who wasn't inside the work. Sometimes you do not choose the result. Sometimes you begin with what is available and the arrangement tells you what it is becoming, and your job is only to not interfere. I had started that morning with what remained from the week's delivery, white frisatia, some late-season ranunculus, a handful of eucalyptus with leaves that had gone slightly silver. Leftover things. The arrangement that came together from them was the most honest thing I had made in a year. Lorenzo came into the workroom. We had converted the north room of the East Wing into a proper workspace, bench and tools, and the second-day bloom buckets and the smell of green things that had become, in 8 months, the specific scent of home, and stopped when he saw it. He was quiet for a moment. What is that one called? He said. I looked at what I had made. White freesia, structurally supported by the eucalyptus branches. Industrial and organic at the same time. Open and protected at the same time. The ranunculus at the center were going toward their fullness, the specific moment before peak where everything is still available. I don't know yet, I said. He came to stand beside me and looked at the arrangement, and I watched him look at it with the unhurried exactness that was still 8 months in, front gate key in my possession. His name on my lips so many times it had worn smooth. Exactly who he was. Unchanged, just visible to me now in ways he hadn't been before. Show me, he said. I reached up, reflex, occupational habit, the thing I had done since I was 16, and tucked the leftover freesia stem behind my ear. He went still. Not the management stillness, the real one. I saw it before he sealed it. That fraction where he was simply a man looking at the one thing in his world that arrived without strategy. He had told me once, in the East Wing, 3 months after Fabricio, when we were lying in the dark and talking the way you talk at 2 a.m, when there is nothing left to perform, the night of the wedding when you spilled the champagne. Every person in my world looks away from me eventually. You looked at me like I was no one, like I was anyone. I did not know what to do with a person who had no idea they should be afraid. He had said, I still don't know what to do with you. He had said, I've stopped trying to figure it out. He crossed the workroom. Slowly, with the deliberate quality of a man who had learned to take his time with things that mattered, he put his hand up and touched the freesia behind my ear. Same gesture, same finger, the same adjustment of a stem that was already fine, and the touch was completely different from the first time. The first time it had been a controlled man making one allowance. This time it was a man touching something that was his to touch, and knowing it, and not being afraid of knowing it. "Come here," he said. I went. He held me with both arms and I could feel his heartbeat under my cheek, and the workroom was full of the smell of the arrangement and the green of the eucalyptus, and outside it was a Tuesday in the late part of the year. The grounds going gold. Marco somewhere on the property having a complicated relationship with a lunch menu. Julia on the phone with someone she was pretending not to be in love with. Santo walking his slow circuit of the east grounds. Ordinary. Impossibly ordinary. "The arrangement," Lorenzo said quietly against my hair. Call it florist." I pulled back to look at him. His face, open, warm, the management nowhere in evidence, the man underneath it entirely present. Did the thing it had been doing for 8 months that I was no longer trying to describe, and had simply started accepting. It looked at me like I was the specific, necessary, irreplaceable thing. "That's a terrible name for an arrangement," I said. "I know," he said. "Use it anyway." I looked at him the way I always had. No strategy, no performance. The specific, undefended directness of someone who had started that evening at a wedding, with no idea she was supposed to be afraid of him, and who stood here now having seen everything and chosen it and was still, simply, looking at him. He held my face in his hands. "Florist," he said. "Warm, completely warm. The word carrying 8 months and 1 operational war and 14 almonds and a brass key and freesia, stems in a kitchen at 2 in the morning. The same 2 syllables from the first night, everything different inside them." "Still here," I said. "Still here," he said. "Outside, the floodlights were off. The gate was shut. Inside, in the workroom, the arrangement sat on its bench. White fricacia, silver eucalyptus, ranunculus at their fullness. And it had a name now. And the name was ours. And the ordinary life we had built around each other was the most radical thing either of us had ever chosen." He kissed me. Not like the first times, not the weight of war and aftermath and relief. Like Tuesday morning. Like the rest of our lives. I held on. The freesia bloomed for 3 more days. What lingers after the last page, Lorenzo Vitelli would never be a safe man to love. Aria knew this the morning she moved into the estate, and she knew it more clearly the morning she put the front gate key on her keyring next to her van key and her studio key and her whole ordinary life. She chose him in the full knowledge of what she was choosing. She did not choose him despite the cost. She chose him because she was the kind of woman who looked at the cost and decided she could carry it. And because she was the only person in his world who had ever looked at him like he was anyone, like he was no one, like he was simply the man in the room. The world his family built did not become safe. But inside it, there were white flowers on a bench, and a woman who named her arrangements after things that mattered to her, and a man who had not been imprecise in 20 years and now allowed himself, carefully, with open eyes, one exquisite exception.